Story 1. As a kid, my family would drive past an abandoned hotel every summer on our way to visit my grandparents. I always begged my dad to let us stay there just one night so I could explore it. But he'd just tell me stories about how it was abandoned because of some horrible tragedy and that we should never go near it. Of course, that only made me want to check it out even more. As a kid, my family would drive past an abandoned hotel every summer on our way to visit my grandparents. I always begged my dad to let us stay there just one night so I could explore it. But he'd just tell me stories about how it was abandoned because of some horrible tragedy and that we should never go near it. Of course, that only made me want to check it out even more. When I turned 18, I decided that I didn't have time to waste anymore. I bought a one-way ticket to the town where the hotel was located and started working at the local diner to save up enough money for a room. I planned on checking in as soon as I had enough cash and spending a few days exploring every inch of that place. I told myself that if my dad ever showed up looking for me, I'd just tell him I was fine and move on with my life. But deep down, I knew he wasn't going to let me do that. After 6 months of saving money, I had just enough to afford a single night in the hotel. When I called to make the reservation, the woman on the other end of the line sounded very nice, but she warned me that the hotel wasn't exactly in the best shape. Still, I didn't care. I was finally going to get my wish. But when I arrived, I saw that the outside of the building was covered in graffiti and that most of the windows had been smashed. The front door was unlocked, so I walked right in. As I stepped inside, I noticed that the walls were covered with more graffiti and that all of the furniture had been ripped apart and dragged into the middle of the floor. It looked like a giant spider had spun a web across the entryway. And when I pulled it aside to walk through, I heard a loud crash from upstairs. I tried to convince myself that it was probably just some kids playing, but as I walked further into the lobby, I saw that the second-story balcony above me had collapsed. There was no way anyone could have been up there. I continued to walk around the lobby, examining the furniture that was blocking the entrance to the hallway. Someone had clearly tried to barricade themselves inside one of the rooms. But when I pushed the door open, it led to nothing but a dark, dank closet. As I made my way deeper into the hotel, I realized that the hallways were starting to bend. I could feel the floor vibrating beneath my feet, but there was nothing I could see or hear that was making it shake. The air grew colder and colder until I had to pull my jacket tighter around myself. Then I heard a voice. It was coming from behind the wall. I stopped and listened, and then I began to hear what sounded like screams in the distance. They didn't sound human, but they didn't sound animal-like either. It was a noise that I can only describe as pure agony. Suddenly, the floor gave way beneath me. I fell down a hole and landed on something soft. As I slowly began to untangle myself from the vines that had been wrapped around my legs, I realized that I was standing inside of a basement that I hadn't seen before. The walls were covered with strange symbols that looked almost identical to the ones that I had seen spray-painted on the floor earlier. Suddenly, the same voice that I had heard in the hallway began to speak to me directly. It said, "Get out while you still can." Then it began to laugh, a horrible, ear-piercing sound that seemed to mock me. I ran as fast as I could away from the voice, away from the hotel. I didn't dare look back to see what was chasing me, but I could feel its presence getting closer and closer behind me. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually the sound of my own breathing became the only thing that I could hear. I suddenly dared to turn around, and I saw that whatever was chasing me had vanished. I stood there in the middle of the street not knowing what to do next. I didn't want to run away, but I didn't feel safe staying. As I looked back at the hotel, I saw a figure standing on the balcony. It was tall and thin, and it seemed to be made out of the shadows themselves. It waved at me and smiled, revealing rows and rows of sharp teeth. Then it disappeared. As I turned to leave, I slipped and fell to the ground. When I looked up, I saw that all of the buildings around me had the same strange symbols that I had seen in the basement. And no matter where I went, I could feel the entity watching me. I closed my eyes, hoping that it would go away if I ignored it. But when I opened them again, I saw that I was no longer in the town. I was standing in front of the hotel, but it looked different. It looked exactly the way that it had when I had first seen it years ago. The paint was still chipping off the side, and the windows were still intact. The only difference was that the sign above the door now read, "Welcome to Paradise." Story 2. A knock on the door. Someone's out there. They're coming to get me. Please don't let them in. Whatever you do, don't open the door." I could hear his raspy voice whispering these warnings into my ear, but I couldn't see his face. He was sitting right across from me, at the old wooden table in the abandoned hotel room, yet I couldn't make out any details in the darkness. All I could see were two glowing embers, where his eyes should be. It had been a long drive to reach this remote location, hours spent on winding dirt roads that seemed to go on forever through the dense forest. And then suddenly the trees had opened up, revealing a clearing with the most beautiful view of a large lake I had ever seen. But the beauty was deceiving because it lured us into a false sense of security. That's when we saw it, the abandoned hotel sitting ominously at the edge of the lake like a rotting tooth. Its windows were vacant sockets staring back at us. The paint on its exterior was peeling away, revealing the rotten wood beneath. It looked like something straight out of a Stephen King novel. We didn't really have a choice but to stay there, though. The nearest town was miles away and the sun was already setting. By the time we got to the hotel, the only light came from the flickering neon sign that swung precariously from the roof, casting eerie shadows on the ground below. As we approached the front door, I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. An oppressive, inexplicable feeling of dread washed over me. The moment we stepped inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. The musty smell of decay and dampness filled my nostrils. The lobby was dimly lit, illuminated only by the beams of our flashlights, which did little to pierce the gloom. Cobwebs hung from the corners of the ceiling, and the plush carpet was stained and ripped in places, revealing the dirt and grime underneath. The wallpaper was adorned with what seemed to be bloodstains. The television on the wall flickered to life, displaying a snowy static. Was it supposed to be on? As we continued to explore the hotel, I could feel an unseen presence watching us, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. On the second floor, we found a room with a broken bed and a rocking chair in the corner. I could have sworn the chair was moving slightly back and forth, but when we turned to investigate, there was nothing there. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and the silence was deafening. It felt as if the very walls were closing in on us, suffocating us with their gloom. And then we heard it, the sound that sent shivers down my spine. A knock on the door. Whoever or whatever was out there didn't want us to find out what was behind that door. The air grew colder, and I could feel the entity's icy fingers grazing my skin. The longer we stood there, the more its presence grew. And then it started to whisper in my ear, its voice raspy and hollow, telling me to run, to escape while I still could. But it was too late. The door had already started to open. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the door slowly creak open, revealing an abyss of darkness beyond. The stench of decay and death wafted out, making me gag. Whatever was on the other side of that door, it was evil, pure and simple. And then it reached out, its skeletal hand beckoning me closer. I wanted to resist, but I couldn't. Something was pulling me towards that door, urging me to open it, to step inside. The last thing I remember is the feeling of icy fingers wrapping around my arm, dragging me into the darkness, into the unknown. Now, years after that fateful encounter, I find myself drawn back to the abandoned hotel. I have to know what happened to him. Did he escape that room, or is he trapped in there with whatever evil lurks within? The questions have plagued me for so long, and now I'm finally going back to get the answers. I'll find him, even if it's the last thing I ever do. Story 3. I found an abandoned hotel in the woods outside of town. It looked like a great place to explore, so I decided to go inside. As soon as I stepped foot inside, though, I knew I was being watched. I didn't think much of it, so I continued to walk inside. That's when I heard a voice. "Get out." I jumped and turned around, but there was no one there. I walked past the front desk and into the first room. There was a rocking chair in the corner with a blanket over it. I walked over and pulled the blanket off. It was covered in what looked like blood stains. I took a closer look and realized they were human skin. I screamed and backed away, tripping over my own feet. As I tried to scramble away from the chair, my ankle twisted beneath me and I fell to the ground. I tried to get up, but the pain was too much and I passed out on the floor. When I woke up, I was in a dark room with no windows or doors. The walls were covered in what looked like blood and there was a single bed in the middle of the room. I don't remember much after that. All I know is that I woke up in a coffin. I haven't been able to bring myself to go back since. Let me tell you how this place began. It started out as just another run-of-the-mill hotel. Sure, the location was a little out of the way and isolated from everything, but it was a solid building. Built in 1922, it had all the makings of a successful business. That was until the events of 1929. During that year, rumors began to spread about the hotel. People said they saw strange lights in the windows at night and heard screams in the middle of the night. Others said they saw the ghosts of former guests and employees walking the halls. Despite the rumors, business was good. That was until one fateful night in October. One night, a fire broke out in the basement of the hotel. Firemen rushed to the scene, but by the time they arrived, the building was already a fiery inferno. They fought for hours to put out the blaze, but by the time they did, the hotel was completely destroyed. No one knows how the fire started, but some say it was the work of a disgruntled employee. Others say it was a guest who had checked in late one night and accidentally started a fire while smoking in bed. Whatever the cause, the damage was done. The hotel was burned to the ground and has never been rebuilt, or has it? Decades later, a new hotel was built in the same location. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but in hindsight, it was probably a mistake. You see, the new hotel was built on the ruins of the old one without taking the time to clear away the debris. This led to all sorts of problems, including a strange mist that began seeping into the basement of the new hotel. No one knew where the mist was coming from, but it quickly became a big problem. The mist was cold and wet and made the basement feel like an icebox. Plus, it smelled like rotting flesh. Employees tried to ignore it, but they couldn't help but wonder what was down there. Was it the lingering spirits of those who died in the fire, or was something more sinister at play? One day, a brave employee decided to investigate. He went down into the basement and followed the mist. It led him to a dark corner where he found a hidden door. He opened it and stepped through, finding himself in a dark, dank room. In the center of the room was a large metal box. He didn't know what was inside, but he knew he wanted to find out. He pried open the box to find a leather-bound book. He opened it and began to read. The book was filled with dark, disturbing images that he couldn't bring himself to look at for long. He slammed the book shut and ran from the room. He never told anyone what he saw in the book, but it's rumored that it drove him insane. Now, people say that if you go to the hotel at night, you can hear the sound of chains dragging metal moans. Some say that if you listen closely, you can hear the whispers of the dead. Are these just stories meant to scare would-be visitors away? Or is there something truly sinister lurking in the shadows of the abandoned hotel? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. That was the end, and now, just as a special treat, here's the ultra-violent, ultra-gory ending for those who dare to read on. As the years passed, the hotel fell into disrepair. The paint on the walls began to chip and peel. The roof leaked and the floors were covered in dust and grime. It was clear that the hotel was haunted, and no one wanted to stay there. But one night, a group of teenagers decided to spend the night in the hotel. They didn't believe in ghosts, so they thought it would be fun to spend the night in the creepy old building. They soon regretted their decision. As soon as the sun went down, the temperature dropped and a thick fog rolled in. The teens huddled together, trying to keep warm and calm their nerves. But as the night wore on, things began to happen. They heard footsteps in the attic above them. They saw shadowy figures moving outside their window. And then they started to feel cold, wet fingers trailing up their spines. The teens panicked and ran from the hotel, vowing never to go back, but one of them didn't make it out in time. One of the teens stumbled and fell, and as he lay there on the ground, he saw a dark figure emerge from the hotel. It floated toward him, and he could see its face. It was pale and emaciated, with long, sharp teeth. The teen screamed, but the creature silenced him with a finger to his lips. Then it reached out and touched him. The touch was ice cold, and the teen felt his life force straining away. The creature lifted its head and let out a blood-curdling scream, and the teen's soul was ripped from his body. The creature dragged his limp form back to the hotel and disappeared into the darkness. The other teens ran as fast as they could, but they never looked back. They didn't want to see what had happened to their friend, nor did they want to know what other horrors might be lurking in the abandoned hotel.